After Romancing SaGa Minstrel Song, I thought I knew what to expect going into Romancing SaGa 2. The leap from the first Saga to Romancing was a massive one in terms of gameplay and style, and I thought that was just a generational jump ahead from the first Game Boy to the Super Nintendo. Even if I hadn't played the original versions of them, their spirits were still intact in the later re-releases that I played. The same thing holds true for the PC port of the mobile version of the Super Nintendo game Romancing SaGa 2. In both ways. Romancing SaGa 2 is a drastically different game from the previous two titles that I've covered. For one, you don't get a character select with different classes or builds like the first Saga or Romancing 1, but it also takes away the open-ended nature of the first Romancing SaGa in favor of having one major storyline taking place over a long stretch of time. It somewhat grounds the direction that the game can take, but at the same time, it still allows you to make your own choices in terms of team composition or what quests you do and how you do them. Talking about Romancing SaGa 2 is a bit weird because a lot of the structure of the game almost makes it feel like a Western CRPG rather than a JRPG. One of the earlier quests at the start of the game gives you the option to either storm a castle head first or sneak your way in with directions pointing you through the dungeon without missing out on any treasure chests. This sort of quest structure is fairly normal, but they're especially interesting when you consider how combat and progression in Romancing SaGa works, as it's built on similar ideas as Romancing SaGa 1, while still being drastically different. The main combat system in place is largely the same as before. You can see combat encounters visibly on the map, so you don't have to deal with random encounters. One big change is the formation system, where combat has a big focus on the positioning of your team, as every skill and ability tends to have preferences in the distance between characters and what row they're in. Instead of the usual JRPG system where you choose between a front or middle row for each party member, formations are set in stone and you learn more as you go through the game. Formations distribute characters in 3 different rows, with some characters behind others blocking most direct melee attacks. Some attacks directly attack one row over the other, or just attack one character and the person behind them. Weapon durability has been removed in favor of a point system that just refreshes anytime you rest or heal up, without the fear of a weapon breaking after too many uses of their abilities. I prefer this a lot over just raw durability, since it still makes you think about and ration out your special abilities while exploring an area without coming across as rough because some weapons simply lacked a free attack. Skills aren't tied directly to weapons anymore outside of a few rare cases, and usually require a user of a weapon type to know the ability instead. So you no longer have to be afraid of making a character learn new abilities on a much stronger weapon after swapping them out. Abilities and weapon skills have been heavily reworked from the previous Romancing SaGa in general, but it has to do with the new focus on team composition and balancing. Unlike other titles, you shouldn't be focusing on getting through the entire game with just one team loadout. Even if you have a few really good characters in your lineup, you're going to be forced to swap them out sooner or later, including your main character. As I've said, the game has no real character select, and instead you choose the gender of your character and a name, and the game starts you off ignoring that entirely as you're put in control of an emperor before swapping him out for his son. It makes more sense in actual context, as the story has him discover an ability that allows him to pass on what he's learned to the next generation, something that in turn gives the next generation that same ability. So as the Emperor dies, his son gains all his abilities and weapon strengths, allowing him to take his father's place and continue the quest with a band of soldiers of his choosing. Because of this, you can build upon the strengths of a previous generation's main character on a different type of character and experiment with your builds a lot. There's never any real fear of messing up, because the game is fairly lenient with how it handles this concept, even if it's a lot more strict and punishing than most JRPGs out there. I mean, it is a Saga game after all. The characters you take with you can be taught previous abilities learned with weapons right out of the gate, and often end up starting with much better equipment than your previous lineup. So even if your entire team composition is swapped out, you still get a good sense of progression anyway. Part of the reason that you get this feeling of progression is because unlike Romancing SaGa 1, Battle Rank no longer has an application to Event Rank. Progression works a lot different in general in Romancing SaGa 2 compared to the first game. For starters, your monetary income is entirely separate from enemy strength, or often even the quests that you're doing. Your treasurer will tell you what your empire's current income is, which is directly related to the quests you finished, as they often expand the empire. Every combat adds this much gold to the empire's treasury, and your max amount of pocket money doesn't increase during the game, so even from the start you will always have the max amount of money you can have. Most towns within your kingdom tend to give you your equipment for free, because you're their leader, so you tend to not really even use that money. Even if you do find stores in faraway lands, purchase items, and want to replenish your funding, you can head back to the treasury and ask for more money to take with you. The indirect system, it kinda works like how your dad sends you money over the phone to your bank account in Earthbound. So the money that you build up in your treasury is used to upgrade facilities in your kingdom, which ties back into creating a higher base revenue, doing quests, getting more options for team building, and there's also the research facility that unlocks better gear for all your characters. Choosing to create new gear there takes them about 5 fights to finish it. There's still enemy scaling though, but a lot of the areas have a cap they won't scale beyond, so you're going to start feeling like you're falling behind the curve if you're not actively researching new weapons, which rely on grinding combat encounters after you have enough income for research, rather than just avoiding all combat. That said, combat without researching anything or having much of an income for your kingdom is a waste, so you should avoid that if you can. Just don't expect something like Romancing SaGa 1 where you actively want to avoid all combat whenever you can. Abilities are still learned by having a character suddenly do them in the middle of battle, but it feels a lot less random than it did previously. Through save scumming after losing a boss battle and just backing out afterwards, I've learned that characters still tend to learn the same abilities that they were going to, but they often learn them later, depending on the quality of the fights that they're in. Weapon proficiencies are upgraded based on the points you get after combat, and the points are a flat rate across every weapon type used. So if the game tells you that you've gained 50 points, every weapon type you used gets the full 50 points. It makes it easier to force characters to learn secondary weapons on the side because you want them to have certain abilities without entirely crippling them. The only problem that I have with the combat comes back to life points. Just like previous SaGa games, a character dying costs them 1 life point. Once life points are at 0, they no longer come back to life and you'll have to find a new party member to replace them. After every combat encounter, everyone is revived and brought back to full health, so long as they have life points. All of this is fine, but the real problem is that you can't remove party members outside of them running out of life points. Are you happy with your team except that one dude who isn't working out? Better start praying for his death, because that idiot is going to stay there unless you saved right before making your team. All in all, the changes to combat made over the previous entries are really good, and it's nice to see the game focus a lot more on its combat so you don't feel like you're doing something bad by fighting monsters. One of my biggest problems with Romancing SaGa 1 was that it felt like you had to actively avoid one of its biggest strengths to the best of your ability to play the game properly. And if you're still trying to play Romancing SaGa 2 this way, you're going to have a bad time when you get to the boss fights that aren't changed by your combat rank. So let's talk event rank, since this is no longer directly tied to combat rank. Every side quest that you complete has an invisible ranking that can cause a time skip. A few of the more important side quests, which end by fading out and showing the map screen, can trigger a time skip if your event rank is high enough. When a time skip happens, you're forced to pick your next main character and form a new party. Usually when this happens, new side quests will start opening up or closing down depending on when the game wants you to do them. It's a lot less rough than having combat govern over this completely. Does all of this make the game more accessible and easy to get into than Romancing SaGa 1, and could you start here? Well, yeah, you could start here. You can also start at Romancing SaGa Minstrel Song, and you could probably start at SaGa Frontier as well. The games aren't linked together that heavily, so anywhere could be your first starting point if you really wanted it to. Playing one game would teach you some of the basics in terms of game structure or combat systems, but not enough to not have anything new to learn or figure out when playing another game. I don't know if I could call any Romancing SaGa easy or fair though. They all come with their own bullshit moments and have the tendency to be incredibly unfair in the weirdest ways. A lot of this, as well as their typical lack of structure, is why I often get that same feeling a Western CRPG gives me. Things often feel like they're decided by a dice roll. While randomness doesn't completely control everything, at least not until Unlimited SaGa anyway, there is still a huge factor of randomness and gotcha moments from simply not being prepared for things that come into play almost all the time. Romancing SaGa 2's enemy positioning often feels like the game's baiting you into a moment of weakness to then launch you into combat. Remember how I said the game places some importance on formation and positioning within those? Your party will only be in the proper formation if you get into an encounter while walking up to an enemy or standing still. Running breaks your formation. Putting a treasure chest next to a bed and hiding an enemy encounter beneath the blanket is a good way to catch people off guard when the chest gives them tunnel vision. Making the chest a mimic at the same time? That's Romancing SaGa. One of the best showcases of how the game will try to trick the unaware player into making a mistake is that first moment of player control. The game puts you into a dungeon. Regular JRPG convention would teach you that you likely want to clear as much of the monsters as you see before heading deeper into this dungeon. Romancing SaGa 2, however, gives you just about the best possible result by just simply leaving the dungeon without fighting any monsters, so you don't waste combat encounters without a proper income or anything being researched. And while this sounds unfair, most of this game and most games in this series are about learning how the systems work and seeing what you can do with them. Also, Romancing SaGa 2 allows you to go into New Game Plus and restart the game with things earned during your run before you beat it. So if you ever get the feeling that you're really overwhelmed or that you're completely stuck, you always have this option open to you. Not only that, but after the beginning scenario, the game doesn't allow a game over until the very end, outside of one specific dungeon. Your party got wiped, your main character ran out of life points, time to pass the skills to the next generation. Sometimes actually changing your party instead of reloading a save file is the right option, but it's really up to you as the game has a lot of leniency in terms of what you can get away with. The story in Romancing SaGa 2 is fairly straightforward. Legends say that a group of legendary heroes will save the day in humanity's time of need. Now is that time, and the fabled heroes are here, except they're assholes and they're making everything a lot worse. So it's up to you to go out there and beat the shit out of them. It's nothing really too special, but I do like the twist on the typical legendary hero format. What I especially liked outside of the combat systems are the music, which you have been listening to the entire video long, and the expressiveness of the combat sprites. I like how there's a basic sprite, a sprite when you're selecting a character's abilities, and a ready sprite after having picked something for them to do. The animations during attacks are flashy and cool too, and I'm glad Square didn't do to the mobile version of this game what they did with Final Fantasy VI. They've said they'd make a mobile version of Romancing SaGa 3 and that it'll come to the West too, and I hope it's going to be like this one, because it's pretty good. That doesn't mean that this port is perfect by any means. There's a very weird input lag that can get you stuck in a combat loop if you try to run away from monsters. The delay is always there, but it's especially noticeable during the period of time when you're allowed to move after running away. Usually it's not too big of a deal because it's a turn-based game, but it can be frustrating to get out of a fight you don't think you'll come out of alright, only to just stand there for half a second before being dragged back in. Apparently the game launched with the entire mobile game touchscreen interface just being there on the PC version, but that got patched out before I started playing. Yeah, Square actually patched out a problem from a PC port. It's a modern day miracle. So in spite of these issues, do I still recommend Romancing SaGa 2? If all of those weird systems sound like something that you would enjoy, then yeah, definitely. SaGa is a fun series full of unique ideas and mechanics that are worth getting into if it sounds like your thing. It's definitely not for everyone, but I would say that it's better for it. Not every series needs to be Final Fantasy and appeal to as many people as possible. This is not a jab at Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy is great at what it does. Anyway, this was AboveUp. I hope you enjoyed this video, and yeah, it's been a while. So in the meantime, I've moved. I'm not in the old shitty apartment. I don't know how much I can get this echo out of the video. You'll probably either be really annoyed or you're like, wait, what echo? As you're listening to this. Because I'm kind of in a slightly bare room that my voice is just echoing around the room right now. And I hope I can kind of remove that because I just wanted to record now that everything is set up. But yeah, I should be making videos normally again from now on. Anyway, see ya!